Good evening, my friends. It is Friday night in Toronto. Well, I guess it's Friday in a lot of places, but it's Friday night in Toronto. Lots of snow the last couple of days. I have been locked up for a bit, and I cannot tell you how much I am looking forward to having a good, robust conversation tonight with a friend. We are going to be talking about designing civil conversations. This is the Smart Self live stream for anybody who doesn't know what the show is about. If this is the first time you're tuning in, I want to share with you, this is a bit of a passion project, just missing people in the midst of COVID, missing the smart conversations I would usually have on Friday nights, usually around my kitchen table with friends, old and new. And it's just been such a blessing to be able to connect with people, and I've found that you guys have really been enjoying it too. Really appreciating all of your feedback, all of your interactions. I do want to let you know that you can tweet us, you can send us a message on LinkedIn, on YouTube. During the conversation, please take part. Very excited to hear whatever thoughts you might have or questions you might have, and we'll bring those into the conversation. And with that, I am going to introduce our guest tonight. We have got Michele Mastroeni. Did I say it right?
You did, yes.
Yes, wonderful. Mike is a professor at OCAD, and you specifically teach in the area of strategic foresight and innovation, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay, give me a bit of an intro here. What does that mean? Because it just sounds so up here.
Yeah, so it's either really interesting to people, or people roll their eyes and they're like, "That's beach," it's buzzword bingo, right? So the Strategic Foresight and Innovation program at OCAD is a master's program, a master's of design, but it's not design in the sense of industrial design or architecture or graphic design or anything like that. What it does is it takes the concepts of design thinking specifically, and what that means is more thinking of they call it stakeholder-centric, human-centric design, where you really think of what your stakeholders need, and it's not just your client, but it's like everybody involved in a particular issue, and then you design solutions around it. So it's a program that, in a way, it's kind of a social science and business program in the sense of the kinds of issues that it addresses. Social policy, economic, business programs, problems of all sorts. And what it does is it takes, so this design thinking concept, how do you think of stakeholders? It takes systems thinking. So looking at a problem, not just for the nuts and bolts and trying to solve each little nut and bolt, but really looking at it holistically and then looking where it sits in the broader kind of societal setting. And then seeing if really the problem is a symptom of a broader problem, and how do you deal with that, or if you actually have to focus down. So it's design thinking, systems thinking, foresight. So that's more futures and foresight, and so it's thinking about the future, but not just. It's not forecasting, which people people know forecasting. Though you forecast the weather and so on. So it's basically you predict like a path, and it's based on statistics from before, and you kind of just draw the line. Foresight is really creating different possible scenarios of different possible futures, and then trying to be prepared for all of them. And then so those three pillars really are kind of what make the program what it is. It gives it a lot of strength. It's pretty unique in Canada, actually in the world, I'd say, where we are one of, if not the only program that combines those three elements. And so I'm the kind of the social scientist. I work with designers. I work with engineers and architects. I'm the political scientist by training. And I guess they brought me in because I used to do policy design back in the day. Before I knew what design thinking was, I was kind of doing it without really.
It's so interesting to me, and I love this intersectional way of looking at the world, because I think that there are so many skills that are transferable, and solutions, there could be one community or one discipline looking for a solution that another community or discipline has figured out, like they've got that nailed, you know, that's part of their best practice. And so I think it's really awesome to have an interdisciplinary approach.
It is. Sorry, it's one of those things. It's one of those things where, I mean, it's maybe it's not that the other disciplines have it figured out, but the way we think of it, and the reason why we want diverse groups, both in terms of skills background, but also in terms of cultural backgrounds and everything, because all that comes into play, is that diverse groups are, one, they're really hard to manage, which actually we'll probably touch on the conversation that we're dealing with today. But if you can manage them and get them to work together, then because they come from so many different places, they can look at a problem from so many different angles, right? So the multitude of biases that people have, look at a problem from as many different points as possible. Whereas if you kind of have people from one cultural background and one disciplinary background and so on, then they're just their biases, and everybody has biases, right? Of course. They're just kind of hitting the problem in the same place, and so they might not be able to move past something, right? So so that's kind of so the benefit of multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity is that, but it also occasionally is painful. You know, people don't always speak the same language, or don't always think about, you know, you have to convince people to look at it a different way. Right? So.
For sure. I think dramatic change cheers. Cheers, everyone. I hope you're enjoying a cup of coffee or a tea or a glass of wine or whatever your drink of choice is tonight. I'm enjoying some Baileys on ice. And what are you having, Michele?
It's a red wine, Jester from Australia. It's actually pretty good. I discovered it last week, and I'm enjoying it. So.
That's very good. I always appreciate a good recommendation. So I think that unless you're in policy, or maybe you touched policy work a little bit when you're in school, unless you're in policy, it's kind of something you don't really think about. Maybe you hear about a little bit during election time. Is it oversimplifying to say that policy is designing our society? Is that too much of an oversimplification? It's our way of trying to intentionally shape society?
Yes and no. How's that for an answer? I think it's not.
Give me more.
It's oversimplifying a little bit, maybe, but I think it depends on the policy you're talking about. Is more, because you can have small policy, right? Maybe it's, you know, so, and it depends on what level you're thinking. I'm not even thinking about like city, province, nation, whatever. But it could just be, you could have policy that addresses the cleanup of garbage every week, or whatever, somewhere.
Sure.
Right? And then versus like bigger policy, like we're trying to create set of policies that address systemic racism, you know. So that's a different level of stuff. And yes, you're trying to impact how society works. Now, somebody could argue that even the policy that addresses the cleanup of garbage every week changes society to some extent, right? Because if there's garbage all over the place, then people will behave differently. They'll treat things differently. They might litter more. They might not respect their own space and so on. So actually, no. So I take it back. It's a yes. It is a good way to describe it. Your policy, you're trying to design society to some extent. I think the reason why it's sometimes a no is that the desired effect may not happen. So it may not happen at all. There may not be a desire. There may not be an effect, right? There may not be a desired effect, but there may be an undesired effect, or at least an unanticipated effect. So too, right?
Yes.
And it's because we're dealing with people.
For sure. Sure. Well, dealing with people, and also the policy is being created by people, right? So there's just natural flaws built in. So this is really interesting. You and I spent time at the University of Toronto at the same time, though we never met while we were there. And we both were in politics, and yet I think that we both took sort of different angles on something similar. One of the things that I am, well, probably the thing I am most passionate about is fixing broken conversations. And today we're talking about designing civil conversations. And the thing that the tie into politics for me was that there are intentions. There are intentions in the Constitution, in the Charter, in legislation, and then it plays out differently. And it either, in society, it doesn't behave that way practically, or sometimes, and this one shocks me the most, sometimes people just aren't aware what the laws are. They don't know. They don't actually know what their entitlements are, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And I think next week we'll actually be talking about policing in Toronto, and I think carding was a really interesting example of this, right? People didn't know if they could say yes or no, and what effect did that have? Being carded on the street, being put into a database, and all of that. So I just think that we both have sort of similar. We're both looking for similar things, and kind of in different ways. You've had that policy work much more deeply than I have. So I guess my first question to you from this angle is, can you shape society, or is this stuff, like when we're talking about designing conversation, can we actually shape that intentionally?
Right.
Or does it have to, through policy or whatever, or is it something that comes up through the grassroots?
Right. So in that sense, I do have to say it's both. I think you can shape society to some extent through policy. I don't think any kind of policy will be effective without the buy-in of the people that it affects, right?
Yes.
Or at least to some extent. Like, so, I mean, this is why policy is so exciting and frustrating and, mysterious to some people and so on. I think you have to get to the point where it's almost like a Zen exercise, right? Where it shows you the futility of your actions to shape something, because as much as you think about something as from as many angles as possible and so on, something's not going to go the way you're hoping it to go. Either it's going to surprise you, or it's going to screw up, or whether in the short term or the long term or whatever, something's going to go off, right? Yes. So if I could take a page out of the book, out of the books that I teach from, because human life is so complex, we're dealing with so many people, so many kinds of people, so many problems of society, so many, the roots of different problems in society and so on. There's, you build policy based on what you know, and you try to increase, what you know. But there's so many things that you don't know, right? And you're never going to know. Like, that's like, to borrow from a person I'm not a big fan of, but from Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns. Like, there's a whole bunch of unknown unknowns. It's just the nature of a complex system.
Yes.
And so you can strive to constantly be looking for the unknown and then trying to figure out, but you have to at the same time accept you're never going to know it, right? So when you design a policy, you have to accept it's never going to be perfect. Right? You have to ask yourself, what's good enough? Can you just move forward? Do you build in flexibility for when it does screw up, or when it does kind of break, or when it needs that change? I think there has to be that acceptance. But the reality is nobody wants to do that. Nobody, it's politically speaking, to admit that you're implementing a flawed policy.
Yes.
It does not. You don't want people to see that, right? And then from the grassroots side, to get to your point about the grassroots, like, we've seen some policy attempts kind of get derailed or pushed back or so on, because the people being impacted by it are like, whoa, this is not what we want. This is not only not what we want, but we're going to resist, right? Because sometimes, depending on who's in power or whatever, sometimes they might say, we know we're going to, upset people. It's Friday night. I'm trying not to swear.
You can. You won't be the first who's done it here.
So, we're trying not to upset people, and but others might be like, we know we're going to upset people, and we're okay with it because they're not going to vote for us, or they're not, or we still think this is worth it, and they'll get over it, kind of thing. But I think a lot of times when they say that, they're like, we're going to upset people, but they probably won't do anything about it. They'll just be upset. And then maybe they'll forget in 4 or 5 years whenever we have to get voted in again. But what if they don't? What if they resist? What if they say, you know what, this is too far. We're going to take to the streets, or we're going to resist in other ways, and so on. And so then it becomes a bigger issue, right? And of course, on the other side, you want people, if people do buy into it, then you get that added kind of benefit where it's all this informal stuff and conversation and thinking that people start just kind of cooperating, even beyond maybe what the policies. So if you're putting in new laws or so on, they might cooperate not only with the letter of the law, but with the spirit of the law, right? So you kind of, so there's those things to think about, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. You know, we often think of politics as that rivalry around voting. You know, who's going to win, who's attacking who to build up whatever equity they can, popularity-wise. The trouble, I think, with politics, and this is like I'm making a huge generalization here, but I think the biggest problem I can see with politics is this physiological animal instinct we have to want to put things into a good column or a bad column.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to your point that, you know, nobody wants to institute a policy and say, you know, this was the best we could do. We understand it's flawed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, you know, no one wants to root for a team that they kind of sort of believe in, you know, you know, even when it comes to sports, if you are unhappy with the makeup of your team that year, you might say it behind closed doors, but you're still going to support them. Right. And so I feel like there is this, a dichotomy in the way that we classify ourselves,
mm-hmm.
you know, and as if there's one side that's got it right and another side that's got it wrong, and everyone's, you know, we're just lobbing opinions at each other.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people it's like that. I think I must be a little strange that way. I kind of consider myself, like, in that sense, a political mercenary. Or at least a political cynic, in the sense that I don't have one party that I have supported throughout, right? I do base it on policy. I base it on attitude, and at least in Canadian politics, that has changed and shifted over time in each of the different parties. That's right. And the one party or that I voted for the last election or the election before that or whatever is not necessarily going to be the same party I vote for again.
Yes.
And it's for different reasons. I think, of course, the personalities for me, the leadership personalities, and it's not just at the top, but like in different portfolios and so on, they change, and I kind of either respect or don't respect what they do and such. Or let's put it this way: I always respect what people do, or I try to have respect on people do, even when I deeply disagree with them, because, you know, they're there, like they are doing the work.
Yes.
There have been recently cases where I have lost respect for leaders, mostly south of the border at the moment, but let's leave it on the Canadian side. But even now, where I'm just like, come on, like you're playing. I guess I lose respect for leaders when they try to play us for idiots, right? When they don't think we can see through the obvious ploy. But so I think I've started sidetracking on the conversation, but anyway, going back to the point of rooting for a team. So I've shifted based on what I see, and I can tell you right now that I am in a shift right now.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel I'm disappointed with some things. Granted, I think the other problem that we have is that, at least, you know, it seems that the alternative choices are also not strong.
Yes.
So then, do you stick with your old loyalties, or do you really kind of start going? Now, I have the background and the interest to kind of go through the nitty-gritty of policy and be like, I like this, I don't like this, you know, okay, do this differently. But a lot of people don't, and that's, I think, something else to accept is not everybody has studied political science for multiple years or worked in policy for multiple years and so on. So it's not like it's their, you know, the simple message is the easy message. You know? Yeah,
for sure.
And so, and of course, it's also the reinforcement of the message where, and we've seen this, where even if a false statement is made and then retracted or corrected, this false statement is made.
Yes.
You know, it's out there, and it's always more powerful than the retracted, you know, or than the retraction of the correction, right? So it also helps further cement the sides. And actually, one thing, sorry, and I don't.
Go for it, please.
One of the things that I've noticed, and here's something else. Like I'm relatively new. I get, well, not new, but in terms of social media, I've not been a heavy participant of social media. I've been kind of on it and following it and so on. I'll occasionally post stuff. But like if you take something like Twitter, for example, it's almost, and it could be the structure of it, but I think it's also the intention of the people on it.
Yes.
Where it's almost like it's a purposeful drawing of the lines, and this is you and this is me, and if you're not on, if you disagree with me, then you're dead to me, or you're worse. I'm gonna chase you down and whatever. And it's like, and I think that kind of environment and arena has really done a lot to destroy the civility of political conversation.
Yes.
And the conversation around policy, right? So it's like, if everybody is either an idiot for enacting a policy that you disagree with, or an idiot for supporting that policy, then what are you going to talk about, right? How are you going to come to a mutual understanding? How are you going to have that respect in the political arena and the debates that you're actually going to be able to do anything, right? So instead of stopping and thinking and saying, hey, why did they enact that? Without going into the cliches of, well, they're in the pocket of so-and-so and the whatever, or they're undereducated, or, all of the things that you've heard and that have been thrown
without attacking.
Exactly. Instead of saying, oh, maybe somebody's afraid of this. Why are they afraid of this? Where's that fear coming from? Is it justified? Is it not justified? And if it's not justified, where's it still coming from, right? And so there's all those different, so I think that's lost to some extent, especially in those arenas, right? And funny enough, it used to be, I think, accepted that if you were in politics, behind closed doors, you would still have that mutual respect. And I'm not so sure that still exists. I think that might have been
interesting.
I mean, they say the words whenever somebody gets publicly attacked in a way that feels unsafe, like, oh, we don't support that kind of behavior. But I'm not sure that, I don't know. I would actually love to hear from somebody who has been in Parliament, a fly on the walls, and to let us know what that's like, right? So.
Yeah, for sure. It is interesting. I do think that, it's interesting to look at something like Twitter, where you've got 140 characters, and say, well, maybe that's the reason. Maybe just those limitations are the reason that people are drawing very, very black and white lines. You're either with me or against me, kind of thing. But then there are other social media platforms where that is not the case. And so maybe we can contrast Twitter with something like YouTube, where some interesting accounts are becoming demonetized or completely shut down. I don't know. I don't even know if this is true, but I feel like I heard something maybe playing in the background one day about the fact that the White House YouTube channel removed all videos of Trump after Biden came in. And again, I don't know if that's true or not. It could be. It might not be. But this idea that you are good and so you deserve to be heard, versus you are bad so you need to be shut down completely. I struggle with that, and it's interesting because I'm very fiscally conservative. Fiscally, I believe in having tight budgets, and I believe in there's this Saturday Night Live skit where this guy's selling a book, and it's like, it's this great system and to help you manage your money. Don't buy it if you can't afford it, And I'm really big on this idea of being fiscally responsible. But then I'm also very socially liberal. I don't even know if that's the perfect term, but I believe in helping each other out and being a community, and there isn't really a party for that. What I do really struggle with is the fact that I have to read a room to know what opinion I can share that day. And a politician does too. And I'm a fairly nice person, I think. If I do say so myself. I get along with lots of different people. I'm curious about lots of different people. And to be afraid of being able to ask questions even, I think is dangerous. I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. And we there's the impression that in the academic world and university world, this is happening more and more. In North America, we hear cases of, both sides, like the contrast, like the kind of we're gonna fight for academic freedom, meaning conservative voices are being shut down and so on, which I'm not exactly sure is true to some extent. I think some people maybe have faced it more. I also think it's because the people who are claiming to be shut down, who are conservative voices being shut down, maybe also put their foot in it. And I'm not talking about like the kind of conservative or opinions that you've just expressed yourself. I'm talking more kind of inflammatory statements.
Sure.
And I have had somebody walk up to me, in a particular, I won't go into the context, but I had somebody ask me politely and sincerely when they found out that I worked at a university, like, do I think that universities are just training centers for leftist liberals?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of said, no, they're actually meant to be centers for critical thought, and you can have any opinion so long as you can back it up and argue it and show evidence for it. And in fact, I would say you're not going to a good university if your views and opinions are not being challenged by somebody else, regardless of what side of the spectrum you're on. Like, you have to feel a little bit of that discomfort.
Yeah, that's
fair. That you're expanding, right? Having said that, I think you're right, because I think there's like, what we're seeing is the fringe elements. Sorry, I don't know if you can see me on the screen. There's the fringe elements of the arguments that are becoming louder and louder and louder. And so all of the different conversations and discussions we would normally have in that broad section that might be considered the center are being muted. And so you're getting this loud discussion, and because first of all, I sound very sure of myself. This is me just kind of riffing right now, so I'm not.
That's great. No, I love it.
This is me just kind of like thinking. I think maybe. Yeah. I'm thinking out loud. So take it for what it's worth. I think part of the problem is that in places like Canada and the US specifically, and we see it in the UK as well, I think because we have these kind of winner take all, first past the post, kind of, two-party in the US case, and in Canada it's like, kind of a 3-4 party case. Sort of. Yeah. We have 5 parties, but really it's sometimes a 2-party thing, right? Two parties with the third party kind of, making up the rest. You're not letting the differentiation of opinion come out, because you have to somehow capture all these people in order to be a viable team. Kind of going back to your point, like, how do you get everybody to root for the same team?
Yeah.
Right. So is it that it becomes lowest common denominator stuff? And I mean that in the negative sense. Yeah. And so then what? Like, so it's the loudest, kind of more strident voices that win. I don't know. I don't know who actually wins in those conversations. So I think I would venture that, if we saw a more diverse political spectrum out there with more choice, then you might see a bit more of, so as you said, you don't see a party for the kind of person you represent, and you might see that party, right? And that party might then also have a chance of having influence, because that's the problem with the two-party system, is that if you're not in one of the two camps, you're not going to have the influence, right? Totally. So, and this kind of and of course in Canada, and we've had this discussion with the current government and so on, where they kind of campaigned on proportional representation, and they came in and they changed our mind. So I get it, because when you're in power, why do you want to dilute your power? Yeah. So it's that tension of like,
for sure. Why take down the system that put you there?
That's benefiting you, right? So now, having said, so if I, as an actual social scientist, kind of political scientist, whatever, we should probably investigate whether anything I said is true, in the sense of, do proportional representation systems seem to have more open political discourse on various different sides and so on? Do two-party or three-party politics, are they becoming more polarized in their discourse? Maybe not. I think there is also just a general polarization in society right now. So the short answer, I don't really know.
Yeah, no, but I think it's worth talking about, and I really appreciate your willingness to just talk about it, because this is the thing that I really miss, being able to sit with friends and have a thoughtful conversation where we wonder and we challenge each other. I have invited people that I think are just amazing people to join me on this show, who have said, I haven't solidified my thoughts on that. I'm not sure exactly what I want to say, so I don't want to say anything.
Right.
And that's not what I'm doing here. I'm not trying to get answers. I'm not trying to solve everything. I'm just trying to bring back the humanity, like sorry, go ahead, please.
I think you just raised an interesting point. We have to remind ourselves of the humanity of what we're doing and talking about it, being in, right? So, and what we're talking about is not so as much as I say maybe the polarization is increasing, it's not a new phenomenon. I think we're kind of in a cycle of it, right? We've seen polarization in the past. We've seen this kind of like us and them type of discourse really, really arising. And I think we're losing sight of why that might be. And so what we should be doing as a society is actually, and this goes back to an earlier point that you made, is actually, listening to everybody who has a say in society. And by a say, I mean yes, voters, obviously, in a democratic society, but we don't want to leave people who don't vote out, because there are also important parts of society, everybody who's not a citizen, and children, and people
sure.
So you want to be able to listen to it. But what is it that they want? What is it that they're afraid of? I find fear is like a big factor in politics, right? So what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of this? Like, where is that fear coming from? Lack of trust. Why don't you trust something? What's coming onto that? And I think there's that. So if you're not addressing those things, it's just going to get worse, right? Because those things are going to get deeper. What's interesting as well, from the human point of things, is the different roles that we play in our lives, right? So I'll give you an example in terms of what I'm thinking. It might be better than trying to explain it. When I worked in the UK, so I spent about 7 years in the UK. Anyway, for one of the projects that I was working on there, we were dealing with the regulation of genetically modified organisms, right? So we were studying the regulation. We weren't necessarily making it up. We were studying the regulation and its impact on innovation and new science and so on that was coming up. And we had the suspicion that a lot of the European regulation on genetically modified crops was very political. It was influenced by politics rather than science. And of course, what does that even mean? Is the science also like political and so on? So we were kind of looking at all these different questions. Anyway, long story short, we had this workshop where we wanted to attract as many different participants, as many different stakeholders around the issue as possible. So we wanted to attract the big, the big agricultural biotech companies, which happen to also be connected to big pharma through the kind of links kind of thing. The farmers, we wanted to attract the environmental groups and academics and researchers, and so we wanted to bring a big group of people around the table. We didn't have an agenda. We wanted to hear what they all said. We wanted to hear what they said to each other and kind of have this discussion of how things should work, maybe if they could design the ideal thing. And we had one group, an environmental NGO, point blank say, we are not coming to the table. I said, why? We will not sit at the table with those groups. And we're like, yes, but how? And I was, a junior researcher at the time, and I'm like, but come on, like I'm trying to get you on board, and I was getting a bit frustrated. And then my senior colleague got on the phone with them and convinced one of them to show up. So this is a big thing. And effectively what it was is, behind closed doors, the person said, I cannot publicly be seen sitting at the table with you guys because my donors and my supporters and my members and so on would see it as betrayal. I may agree with some of the things you say. Yes, I may strongly disagree with some of the, I strongly disagree with some of the things you say, but I may agree with some of the things. Yeah. But even just that little agreement would be seen as kind of a betrayal, right? And so it's kind of this. So you have to think of the roles that we play, how they influence what we do in both in public and in private and so on, who we're speaking to, whose attention we're trying to get. But then we're also, and then if you look at it in more kind of abstract terms, we're talking about, this same senior colleague of mine wrote about values versus interests. So if you're dealing with a conflict based on interests, it's easier to come to a compromise, because you can say, all right, I'll give up some of my interests for this gain if you give up some of that, and so on. And a compromise is a good deal.
Yes.
But when you're talking about values, compromise is loss. Like you've compromised your values. You're not supposed to compromise your values. You've betrayed the cause, right?
Yeah,
so
totally.
When it's framed in as a value conflict, it becomes a lot harder to get there, right? And so then the question is, can you detour or dance around the value conflict to get to what the interests might be, right? Or accept that you're not going to get anywhere on that one. Yeah,
totally. Totally. And the idea that certain values are mutually exclusive is challenging to me too. So I'll give you a practical example. And if it's not clear to you yet, it will become clear to you in a second that I'm a pretty open book. But, pro-choice, pro-life. I am pro-choice because I really, truly cannot put myself in everyone's shoes and understand and know, and I'm going to respect your right to choose. And I hope, based on whatever internal values I have, I hope that you have the opportunity and the choice and all of those things to choose life. I hope that is the outcome. But to think that to be pro-choice or pro-life means you have no respect for the other side is such a black and white game. And don't get me wrong, I recognize that there are a lot of people on both sides of that debate that see absolutely no value in the other person's point of view. I just think that it's very interesting from a corporate perspective. Whenever I'm trying to come up with a strategy, I work in marketing, and whenever I'm trying to come up with a strategy for an organization, or if there is internal upheaval or anything like that, it always comes down to values, always. And if your values don't fit with the organization and its direction, you don't belong there. You need to find a place where your values fit, because when everyone's values are aligned, the direction, the strategy is all aligned, the tactics are all aligned, literally the day-to-day is aligned, and you're able to say to folks, well, it's not that you're good or bad, but this is an Apple behavior, that's a Microsoft behavior. Are you Apple or are you Microsoft, right? And how do you do that in a society where we all don't share the same values? So I'm going to hop a little bit back to something that you said about your experience in the UK working on that policy. I have an example here in Toronto. Toronto hosted the G20 a number of years ago, and there was a public inquiry, and they invited the public to come and make submissions. And I was contracted to handle the press for that, to communicate with the media and that sort of thing. And I was very interested in this issue. I really wanted the people to be heard on this. And I personally was kind of trolling around on Facebook groups and found that the groups that were angriest about the G20 in Toronto were collectively coming together and saying boycott. Not only boycott these public inquiry sessions, but let's block the entry. The doors to these things. And as a person, as a human, as a citizen, I went into these Facebook groups not as a professional saying, hey, please come to my event, but saying that you're right, this isn't enough, but this is finally one chance, one group that's saying we want to hear from the public, and we're going to turn that down. And luckily some people came and were heard, and some beautiful stories were told that needed to be heard. So this idea of not being willing to sit at the table, you can't fully protect your interests if you aren't willing to also consider the interests of others. I think.
I think you're right. I think it. So I'm all the gray area, right? So I think yes, but
it's hard. It's hard, you know.
But yeah, and I get it. And I think it depends on the issue, and I think it depends on who you're speaking to and what alternative ways of being heard you have, right? So it depends on how big you want to go.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right. So yeah, maybe with the G20, there's some issues that people are like, we should be heard and we might be able to make change. And maybe the people who are in power might listen to us. Others might say you're just being co-opted. Your issue is going to be heard. They'll say some nice things. They'll make some nice promises. They'll feel less guilty, and then they're done, right?
Yes.
Or they might make a small change. You know, don't forget, like the biggest argument that, like the you know, if you go back to your old Marxist texts from political science, you know, 200 or whatever.
Professor Pangl.
There you go. Like it's, you know, the welfare state is not the friend of a Marxist. In fact, it's like the direct opposite, because it's a way of co-opting that interest. It's a way of fobbing them off. It's a way of kind of convincing people that, yeah, you're doing something, but you're not really doing something of their deeper interest, right? And I think that's where some of those comments about boycotting, I'm not a Marxist, but, you know, just kind of saying, some of those comments of boycotting.
It's good on paper, you know. Some things are good on paper. What are you going to do?
But I also understand some people who are like, you know, we're going to boycott. Like if you, so if you're a person who, you know, like, I don't know, without getting into dangerous waters, like if you are representing, you know,
use me,
Black Lives Matter or whatever, or something like that, right? And you're like, and I don't know. So this is just me again. This is a hypothetical statement. If you then say, right, the system there's deep systemic racism. This particular element of the system is broken. And then you go and participate in the system. Are you, and I frame it as a question, are you, as you say, having your voice heard, or are you co-opting yourself and kind of losing your power by then trying to work with the system rather than change the system, right?
Yeah.
Or you know, and I think so the reason why I say it depends is I think it depends on the issue, how extreme it is, and how much it impacts your own self. And by own self, I don't just mean the change in my pocket and a little bit of tax money or whatever, but if it fundamentally can have me cease to exist, then I might not want to play in that system, right? I will try to break the system. So it's so I think, I mean, that's the thing about politics, like for us and policy and anything, and why I'm always that kind of, it depends kind of guy, because everything you said is true. I can agree with it. But at a different scale or at a different level, I have to take another look at it. And it's not necessarily that I'll disagree, but it's just I'm like, well, hold on a second, right? I don't know.
So this is interesting, because I think part of the problem is we want clean groupings, because that makes it a little easier to handle. Everything is a little cleaner if we have clear definitions. And then we end up in a period of or a conversation, a debate around identity politics. So, you know, I remember this, I vividly remember this video of protesters after the George Floyd incident in Canada, in Toronto. I remember protesters on the streets, face to face with Toronto police officers, one of whom happened to be the most senior ranking ever Black officer, woman officer in the Toronto Police Service, and them yelling in her face that she was part of the problem. And I understand their perspective, and I understand what she's done. And I think that it's about, like, in some ways, maybe we all have to fight battles that we believe in our own way. And we chip away at a system, or, you know, at our problems. And maybe that's how we make progress. But to automatically say you're either good or bad is so dangerous to me.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to leave the good or bad out, but I think your point about the kind of the different ways of perceiving people, that kind of there's the term intersectionality, but I don't think that's not really what we're talking about here. I think so that the multiple roles that people hold, right? So so a Black female police officer
Mm-hmm.
is still at the head of a system that people would perceive as
Mm-hmm.
hurting them, right? In that case.
Sure.
And so it doesn't matter who you are individual, you are now representing the system. Has the system changed because you're there?
But yeah,
maybe
that's the thing.
Subtly, maybe eventually, but if
Mm-hmm.
it's still impacting me negatively, I'm still gonna be angry with it, right? What have you done for me, really? So
yes, I get that.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess so I think there's that, and I agree with you. I think maybe in that individual's, in any individual in that kind of position, maybe they think I'm making change from the inside. Now people will listen to me, possibly. And I think that is one way to make change. On the other hand, they may be stymied by the system. Once you get into the system, you're kind of
shut down. That can happen,
down, right?
Sure,
there's the people above you, there's the people beside you, there's the organizational cultures, there's all the kind of benefits that you might get from it, and so on. You're no longer black, you're blue, right? Or you're no longer whatever, you're this. And so but it kind of reminds me of this old, like I think it was from the 50s or 60s article called actually we forget the title. I always call it "Where You Stand is Where You Sit," kind of how I summarize it.
Okay.
It's this idea that your viewpoint and your advice stems to a certain extent from the position that you're holding in your job or organization or society. And if you then change position or role in society, if you then change your role or your job in society, your position is going to change.
Yes.
So you'll give. So when you wonder how is it that guy sitting over there gave this advice, and when he joined that organization, he did a 180 and he gave totally different advice.
Yes.
What a hypocrite, right? That would be the reaction.
Totally.
But actually,
perspective.
Well, in terms of the perspective, So the rational choice for that individual changed because the calculus around him, all the circumstances and so on around him, made the calculus change. He's like, this is now the rational choice for me to back this up. So I think, getting lost in the conversation, I think I see that. To me, like you want to be sympathetic to individuals in those positions, and at the same time, you also see why people may not buy that they're part of their group, right? I think to your point, more the problem, or how do you find the solution, is how then do you open those conversations among those people, right? How do you create that? Yeah, hold on a second, but listen, And I don't know. I think it's. You need to. I think there has to be some outlet for the anger.
Yes, that's fair.
I think there has to be some outlet for the anger. I think there has to be some outlet for the hurt. And I think there has to be some expectation that there will be hurt back, like in the sense that. So, and we see this with, reactions to, like, even recently I was reading, I think the other day, 2 days ago or something like that, the article about, there's an article on systemic racism and how dare they say there's systemic racism. I'm not racist, you're racist, kind of whatever. It devolves into that kind of, I'm not racist, you're racist, whatever.
Let's call each other names. Sure, it happens.
And I think it's, if I say something negative, if I say that you are part of a system which is negative, I can't expect you to like it.
Sure. Because I know you said I'm going to stay in the gray, not talk about good or bad. Yeah. But ultimately that boils down to, I'm saying you're bad.
Right. And so I think this is what I mean. Like, I think there has to be, yes, a space to air anger and grievances and rage against the powers that be, especially, and again, depending on the issue that we're talking about, that rage will be stronger and more visceral and more real and more immediate than others. But at the same time, we have to expect, and this is me as a policymaker, you have to expect the resistance. You have to anticipate the resistance.
Yeah.
And then in that anticipation, you're like, now, so if we know there's going to be resistance and we know there's going to be backlash, what do we do? Right?
Yes.
How do we prepare ourselves for that backlash? Absorb it, roll with it, and then still try to build something positive out of it, right? So yes, I know you're going to react badly to me saying that about the system. So how then do I explain to you that you can be part of the solution, that you can be, that we can have this role? And I think it's a flaw that the multiple sides of a debate tend to have, right? Some more
it's a
than
human
others.
flaw.
Yeah,
Really.
And I'm not pulling the kind of the good people on
Mm-hmm.
both sides kind of thing that we don't want to be doing, but as we've right. But it's. I think we are blind to the concerns of the other side many times, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard to listen when you want to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even harder to listen when you feel unheard.
Yes. Now, at the same time, I think there is certain things in say that should just be called out, right? Like I think so. There is sometimes
there are true evils.
Yes,
absolutely.
So there are
absolutely
limits, right? And I think there's like, so if like, hey, if you're saying a hateful thing or whatever, I think it should be called out. I think it should be called out. I think it should be
totally
stopped. And I think, and so on. And that's not shutting down free speech. It's not shutting down academic freedom, whatever. It's just, you have stated something indefensible. And many people would say that it's indefensible. And so, stop and then take a step back and then, I think what we don't do necessarily is then ask, why did that person state something indefensible? Right?
Yes,
is it just because they're a
bad
person and therefore don't deserve any of our time or whatever? But there's a lot of people like that. So what is it about those statements? What is at the root of those statements that we need to look at?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. Whether I'm not saying we need to agree with them. We may not even sympathize or like them, right? I'm not saying we have to do that, but we have to at least consider that they exist and then find the root of why they exist in order to be able to do something, right? So
that's very powerful, I think. In engineering, I don't know the exact principle, but there's something like the 5 whys. When something goes wrong, you have to ask why 5 times in order to get to the root. You can't just say, this thing overheated. Oh, okay, well, let's put a cold fan on it. Well, why did it overheat? Well, why did that thing create that extra energy? And you have to keep digging. And I think oversimplification, the same way I think that oversimplification is a danger in terms of saying someone's right or wrong, good or bad. Oversimplification is a problem across the board. If you're going to stay away from root cause, that's dangerous because you'll never actually fix a problem. And the fact is, we are complex animals. And so, it's fine in the animal kingdom to be right, wrong, good, bad, dead, alive, whatever. But
in the animal kingdom, one would argue there's no right or wrong. It's just survival.
Dead or alive. Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. I think that's something that we need to own. That with the complexity and the beauty and all of the sophistication that we have and get to enjoy as complex animals, we also have to concede that things are gray more often than anything else.
I think one of the things that I've had this conversation with some of my students in class, and one of the examples I sometimes give the vaccine example, but another example I give because it's more kind of jarring to people who tend to go to university is the flat Earth movement, right?
Yes.
The flat Earth movement. There's a flat Earth movement. And people are like, how? They're so ignorant. Oh, that's so stupid, whatever. I'm like, yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think the Earth is round and there's, whatever. But why do they believe that? Right? Yeah. Why do they believe that? Like, why do they believe the moon landing was faked? Why do they believe, why do they not believe the science being presented to them and so on? Yeah. And is it the question, is it that they're just ignorant? Or is it that they don't see that they don't trust certain people and certain kinds of authority? Why don't they trust that authority? Where did that come from? What would they need in order to trust?
Totally.
anyway, so it's kind of you know, I think that's where you need to start
No.
digging deeper. I'm also hearing my cue to start, I think, having to wrap up this conversation. So,
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. I have really enjoyed this. I have a feeling we'll get a chance to do it again if you're open. We'll see.
yes, no, I think that, yeah, let me know. This would be fun. This is fun. This was fun. So I've
Okay,
enjoyed it.
good. I for sure. I enjoyed it too. Cheers.
Okay.
And yeah, well, salute. And yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm gonna hit you up after this another time so that you and I can have a chat sometime.
Okay.
I want to hear more about your journey and such.
No problem. My pleasure. You got it.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Ciao,
Right.
Michele.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, people. My hair is coming apart. I have had a very long day, and I'm not peeling away yet because there's just so much in that conversation I want to dig into. And I know that I can't do it all now, and I know that I'm not going to do it myself, and that's fine. But here's the thing. I want to connect with people. I want so desperately to connect with people. I love connection. I want to learn about experiences, people, cultures, beliefs that are different than mine. I want to live in a society that respects those things. There's this, I'll try and find the details so that I can share it with you another time, but there is one very conservative group led by a very conservative man. A lot of people would call him a white supremacist. I don't know enough about him. I'm not just going to say someone's a white supremacist because I heard someone say that person is. I don't know anything about this person's politics. I just know that this far right, this man who's considered on the far right, voted for and was in favor of President Biden's presidency bid, to try and become the president of the United States. And it doesn't really make sense. Why would this, thank you. Oh, we got a comment here. Keith Thompson, thanks so much. Very relevant to patient context and things like vaccine hesitancy. That's very interesting. Thank you, Keith. I really appreciate the comment. And welcome any more engagement there. For this one man on the far right to be supportive of Biden, who is on the left, and a lot of people might say on the far left, is confusing. And then when he was asked, when this far right politically viewed man was asked, why do you support Biden? He said that Biden supports segregation. He just supports it from a different angle of the debate. And so from a far right perspective, that's what he wanted. From this extreme perspective, he wanted segregation, and he felt that Biden was asking for segregation just from another side of the debate. And that's the thing that scares the heck out of me. The fact that we can go so far to the edges of the spectrum of our ideologies, the fact that we can dig in our heels so deeply to a point where we stop seeing the other side completely, that we lose complete respect for each other. That is so troubling to me. And I recognize that it is built into me to behave that way too. I recognize that and all of us, every single one of us, but I'm owning it too. I recognize that we all have this tendency to want to be right, good. We want to survive, and it's easier to name the villains in our lives as bad and wrong, no good, worth being shut down and not being heard. But the fact is, balance is actually where true power is safest. That, there's the saying, and I don't have the source off the top of my head, but there's the saying that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I'm just learning more and more about myself, and I can't help but think that maybe the best option is always a minority government. You know, maybe it's just best to always have all people at the table. But that also means not having one governing power and one governing voice. And is anyone willing to accept that? How can we sit at a table together with our enemies and make decisions that are right for our community, that are right for our families, our loved ones? It's just, I don't know. I believe in the collective. I believe in our ability to support each other, back each other up. But that also means that I'm putting myself in the hands of people who do not have my interests at heart. And I'm willing to do that sometimes. I'm willing to lose sometimes. I'm willing to be the person who, you know, gets called the villain, or is told she's wrong, or told she's no good. I'm willing to do that because that means that there's fairness. I'm not sure other people are willing to do that. And honestly, it's not that I believe that I'm the end all be all or anything like that, but I do very strongly feel that it's hard to love weakness. I've accepted that every time someone's pointed out my weakness, it has made me stronger. It's like my enemies are my teachers. Got another comment here from Keith Thompson. Thank you so much for your engagement. We need to recognize that lack of affirmation is not hatred. It's very, very powerful to say that. I think psychologically, it's hard to feel unheard. When we feel unheard, we feel unloved. When we feel unvalidated, we feel unheard. It's very interesting in lots of studies around active listening and affirmation. We know that the best way to make someone feel heard is to affirm what they've said. Either say, I understand why you feel that way, or to paraphrase exactly what they've said. People do not feel heard until they've had that affirmation. But listening is itself a gift. And for someone to listen to you and not interrupt you and wait for their turn, that is still a gift. It's definitely not hatred to not be affirmed. And there's, I'm the worst with names, but there's this awesome book and video online that you can find. It was called The Last Lecture, given by a professor who it was pretty much his last lecture. But the concept of this last lecture was, every year they ask a professor or an academic of some kind, some expert, to give a lecture as if it's the last lecture that person could ever give in their life, and what would they want to say to the world. It just so happened that in this circumstance, this professor was actually dying. I don't even know if it was a professor, to be honest, but he was an expert of some kind. And he was actually diagnosed with a terminal illness, and this was one of the last chances he would have in his life to tell the world what he thought. And he shares this one point. One of his lessons is about how when something is hard on you, when a person is hard on you, when the circumstances around you are hard, that is actually a sign of care. That if you, and I'm just going to say this in my own plain language. It's 8 o'clock. I've been working since 8 this morning, so I'm just going to say this as it comes to me. This last lecture, I think was the second point, was that if someone is hard on you, it's because they believe you can be better. And now, I'm not talking about generalizing. I'm not talking about being hard on a community. I'm talking about a person. If someone takes time out of their day, out of their life, to give me feedback, they care. They absolutely care. And I can say, oh, this person's out to get me, and this person doesn't want me to succeed. Or I can ask myself why the hell I'm so uncomfortable, which will probably point to the fact that they're right, and I can work on it. I can try. And I just, this aversion to being wrong, to being weak, to being imperfect is what keeps us from perfection. It's what keeps us from being our best. Thank you, Keith, so much. Joseph Grenny, Sources of Influence, great read. I appreciate that. I will check it out. Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And you look like, from what I can tell in the picture, you look like you're in scrubs. I wonder if you are, and you did actually mention vaccinations earlier, so maybe you're in the medical space. Thank you very much for everything that you're doing today, these days. There's a lot being asked of every single one of you in the medical space. And I don't know, I'm gonna wrap it up, but I'm gonna say that I hope that my openness helps others feel like they can ask questions. And I hope that anyone who's listening today feels like they can challenge without provoking, and think and grow without diminishing someone else. Because right now, I am terribly concerned about the fact that we are standing on each other in order to get ahead. All of us. No one is exempt from this behavior. Not one of us is exempt. Not me. So I just truly hope that my weakness, my vulnerability, my flaws, I hope that I can help you maybe see something that you didn't see yesterday, or open up and show something to someone else that they have yet to see, to learn. Thank you so much, Keith. Keith says, great session. Thanks so much. I am just honored. I'm honored by every bit of interaction. I'm honored by my guest tonight, Michele Mastroeni. And I am Juliana Tricolocina, because why not? I might as well go with the long name. And I just want to wish a happy weekend, a happy Friday to all of you. Thank you for your eyeballs. Thank you for your ears. And please send me your ideas, message me, direct message me, like privately message me if that's what you're comfortable with. I am doing this to connect with people. So please take me up on my offer. I'm fun to talk to, I think. So have a happy Friday. Have a happy weekend. Love, care, and just joy to all of you from the Smart Self live stream. Talk to you soon. See you next week. Next week we're talking about policing and governance. It's going to be a cool show. Make sure you attend. Looking forward to it. Bye, everyone.